Welcome to the Deconstructing Data podcast and broadcast. I'm Jessie Lezak, fractional CMO at BDEX, along with BDEX's founder and CEO, David Finkelstein. How's it going, David?
Hey, Jesse, doing well. I am getting ready to take my first day off, personal day off for in a long time tomorrow. So I'm looking forward to that. It's my 27-year anniversary, so we're going to take a day off.
Oh, congratulations. You guys going to do anything fun?
Yeah, we actually chartered a boat, and
Nice.
we're going to spend the day on the water tomorrow. So
I love that. That's great. Well, before your day off, we get to have another awesome deconstructing data today because we are lucky enough to welcome back on Fariba Zamaniyan, VP Data and Analytics at TiVO. Welcome to the show, Fariba.
Hey guys, how are you? It's great to be back and nice
yeah.
to see you as always.
Yeah, it's great to have you back, Fariba. It's been a little while, but you are a regular guest of the Deconstructing Data podcast. So why don't you kick us off for those listeners or viewers that haven't met you before with a little bit of background, your background, a little bit about TiVO as well.
Sure. Yeah, and I do have to say I'm very jealous that you're going out on a boat tomorrow here in the Northeast. That is not what we get to do. As it's like a sea of leaves instead of heading out into the water. But yeah, based out of New York on Long Island, particularly specifically, and so for those of you who haven't had the pleasure of meeting virtually, as David and Jess said, my name is Fariba Zamaniyan, and I'm Vice President of Data and Advertising Sales at TiVO. My background is I've been effectively monetizing data as a product for advertising and technology, specifically to help address the opportunities that are arising as the media and advertising industry continues to evolve. And I joined TiVO 13 years ago to effectively bring forward access to big data that can really help think outside of the traditional means that we were using data through a single controlled monopoly that was panel based of planning and buying and selling advertising at more granular and targeted levels. So at TiVO, we have effectively developed software known best as the DVR creator, but the software that we devise as part of those boxes is really what we've leveraged as a product that we sell to cable TV providers across the US. And that software enables us to passively capture the data for viewership activity. So the programming that's being watched and the commercials that air within them. And that's effectively called viewership data. And that has been, and I think will be a big part of our discussion today, because that's really been a catalyst for a tremendous amount of change that's taken place in the industry. We sell that data. My team sells that data into the marketplace as a syndicated asset, which enables both the buy and the sell side and everything in between to have the intelligence that they need for a variety of use cases when it comes to buying and selling advertising, both on a linear and digital basis. So that's kind of how I got here. And I really summed it up there's a lot more that took place in between, but really the foundation of my time here at TiVO is really to harness the power of the television viewership data and make it available to the market, which, looking back 13 years ago, never thought we'd be here today, which it's an incredible time for this industry.
It is. Time flies for sure. It's we're almost 10 years at BDEX, so it's crazy that as well. So one of the things we wanted to talk about is the importance of deterministic data, and so you talked about and you mentioned the importance of the TiVO data set. So give our listeners a little bit of your thoughts around that.
Yeah, I think we've certainly, when we started out 13 years ago with this asset of capturing passively on a second by second level what households across the US are watching on linear television and the advertising that they're being exposed to during those programs. We realized that this was a real game changer because we were enabling the marketplace to gain control by having access to data that gave them transparency into the consumption of video content, rather than it being controlled by a single provider that was managing a panel. And I think that was a real, a tremendous change for the industry, was by giving access to the market of this data of what is being watched or not being watched, and the potential to expose and advertise via advertising. And then fast forward into the digital intrusion and what we could do with that data to then extend the reach of campaigns to mobile devices or laptops by being able to identify a variety of device IDs to that same household. Really kind of exploded the capabilities that the marketplace had in getting more granular and targeted in how we define an audience, and then how we can deliver advertising messages to them, both on a linear and on a digital basis. And all of that is because of the democratization of data that's taken shape. And that data is deterministic. That is the actual capture, in the case of viewership data, the second by second clickstream information. So it's not based on a probability of what you're going to watch or what you may have watched that I have somehow modeled and scaled you. And because these are such enormous decisions that are being made because of the investment dollars, because it always comes back to money, right? There's so much money at stake. The decisions that we're making or providing access to both the buy and sell side to price their inventory, and on the buy side to determine if a set of programming is the right place to reach their specific audience. The data that's driving those decisions is critically important and doesn't have room for error. And the room for error is introduced when we move further and further away from deterministic into the probable space. So I think the message for your viewers and listeners is that we are now entering a market that has fully embraced the power of data sets like TiVO, as well as many other big data assets. Because they become more readily available, because they are a byproduct of technology and the advancements that have been made, is that now we're in a place in our evolution that is willing to transact against this data at significant levels. So it's not on a campaign per campaign decision. Now the industry is making budgetary decisions against an entire year that are going to be driven by data. So deterministic is why I say let's go back to the basics and remind those in the industry that are familiar, is that deterministic will have greater impact on your campaign execution than the reliance on a probabilistic, which we may have, in the early days, we had no choice because we were entering into this realm of digital activation of advertising in these exchanges or automated bidding and selling processes. But now, given the budgets for your clients and customers are going to be investing at a much higher level, it's not just okay, let's dabble here and there, that the risks are greater, and therefore the requirement really pressing that we're always questioning the sources of the data, particularly when it comes to those that are of scale, like television data, to ensure that they're deterministic in nature.
So for our listeners, what then?
Hopefully that all made sense. It was a lot to digest, I know, but I'm way closer to it than a lot of you.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, again, we all have a really great understanding of things that we're closer with, and then what happens is there's, you have listeners that are saying, okay, well, how do I access this data? Where can I find this data? Do I need to call you? Can I find it online? So why don't you help our listeners understand, once they make that decision, okay, this sounds really interesting. Deterministic data, we agree with you. That's really important. The TV data that you're talking about is really interesting. How does an advertiser or an agency or whoever's going to make that decision to use this data, how do they do it?
So
It's a loaded question. I know the answer. So,
yeah.
but, it's for our answer. For our listeners.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because I think that's really where, the where things start to fall apart, and we rely on what we're able to access and find, especially if we're under time constraint. And I think it's for listeners, it's really understanding, the relationships that you have with, let's say, if it's an agency or a vendor that's creating these audiences for you, it is really to challenge and understand the basis for the data that's being used to define those audiences. So in the case of TiVO and what we do, we work with BDEX in a couple of different ways. One is we are creating pre-built audiences that are based on our deterministic viewership data, based on some of the common inquiries that have come in over the years of interest. For example, genre-based audiences, subsetting the population of those watching linear TV based on those who watch live sports. And we can go deeper into those that watch live sports by, for example, a league. We were talking about MLS earlier. So those that are tuning into MLS in total, which includes women's and men's, and then segment them separately. So a lot of those can be found in some of the common platforms or data exchanges, such as a LiveRamp data store, the Trade Desk, and they're pre-built, readily available. And if you're not sure if they're deterministic and you have a license to one of those platforms, you should ask your rep or look at the details that describe the data set that defines those audiences, to ensure that you're fully informed when you go to activate a campaign that leverages them, that it is based on a deterministic data set. And then if you are interested in building your own or customizing audiences, then contacting us directly is obviously the best and most direct way to go. But you should do that with all of the partners that you have leveraged in the past or are considering doing forward. Is really ask them about, is the seed deterministic if you're creating an audience for digital retargeting, and really probe on how it's being defined to ensure that you are confident so that you can maximize the return on your campaign execution.
I think that's a really good point, because there are a variety of different TV data sources. But I think, to your point, one of the things that's very specific and unique about TiVo's data set is it is a deterministic data set. So
Yeah.
I think that's important for people to understand where the data is coming from.
And it always, as we've talked about forever, David, it always comes back to outcomes, right? Yep. And we're in a particularly challenging, although it's an exciting point of our life cycle, it's also been a very challenging one in the last X number of months, because we've had a writer strike, we've had an actor strike, which yay, both have ended, but they have depressed the volume in the advertising industry. It's been on a slowdown. And at the same time it's happening, where we are all abuzz about connected TV and the video opportunities for commercial advertising within FAST channels. But yeah, we really haven't fully understood FAST and what is the best time to target, how to target, which inventory, because it is just a sea of inventory. It's non-scheduled. People are tuning in, unlike traditional linear, where the greatest audience to reach is going to be 8 to 11 p.m. And Thursdays tend to be one of the biggest days of the week where you can get the most eyeballs and have the greatest opportunity to reach them. But that understanding isn't fully there with FAST. And so we've got all of these challenges that we're trying to capitalize on. And so so what we are placing now, before it gets to an even bigger dollar amount, thankfully we expect to see the ad business volume return now that these strikes are over, is that it's about outcomes and maximizing the opportunity to impact the target audience you're intending to reach across devices, including CTV. The pressure is even greater. So, and the risk too, the further you move away from a deterministic data set that provides that targeting capability.
So, Fariba, talk to us about the data on the data. Can you talk to us about the importance of the metadata?
Yeah, and I'm glad that we brought this in as a topic, because I think we've talked, we've just been talking about viewership data, right? Because we think about currency. So Nielsen has been a single currency provider to the advertising industry for decades. And it's been, relished and embraced. It's had its challenges, but it was based on a panel, opt-in consumer panel of 41,000 households across the US. And it served its purpose. But as we've moved forward into this technological explosion that gave us the benefit of big data assets, we focused a lot on viewership data, because that is the one thing that now no longer is just in the control of Nielsen. Now we can see what's being watched, for how long, are commercials being presented to the intended audience. So this transparency is opening up in the market, and it has been the critical component to defining currency. And currency is how you transact advertising dollars, defining a value and a cost that you're willing to place an ad based on the audience you're trying to reach and number of eyeballs accordingly. But the other component of this currency, in addition to viewership, is metadata. So it's not like there's some magic dictionary out there that says, oh, that program that was tuned in was Friends, running in syndication on this affiliate call sign at XYZ DMA for this start and end time. That is all factual information that has to come from somewhere. And that is what and how viewership data is classified. You need a program identity in order to tie that viewership occasion to the actual content. So it's factual based, it's not people based, it's a catalog. And TiVO has been one of those sources. There are several of them, unlike what we saw with viewership, where it was solely owned by Nielsen. In metadata, there are multiple sources. And the importance of metadata, especially as we go into this nonlinear world of over-the-top content that you can stream on demand, the catalog of programming is immense. And the task of classifying and identifying what those programs are that can be then tied to what people are watching is equally important. And that's become a real game changer as well in the market today, because in this digital ecosystem where we are interoperable, we are tying together identities in order to understand within a household all of the device identities and touch points that I can reach them, that we also need to have this interoperability of a metadata source that can effectively define that programming across all of those devices and different data sources. So, with this emergence of technology, programmatic being, one of the greatest innovations that's been changing advertising and how it's transacted, is you have multiple competitors that have risen to the table. They've challenged Nielsen on their approach because they have access to big data, coupled with technology that enables them to bring all of these touch points together in a cross-platform fashion that today are challenging Nielsen. Not that anyone's canceling their Nielsen contract. I do want to caveat that, but they're challenging them by presenting an alternative. And metadata is a part of that conversation, because metadata needs to be interoperable across this entire ecosystem. So it is equally important. It doesn't get enough discussion. It is also a component of how contextual advertising is derived, by defining all of the aspects of programming so that you get super granular in targeting placement of advertising for video content in particular.
Wow, that was a lot. So
it's a lot.
But you know what? It's, for me, I love it, because like I've always been fascinated by the idea of metadata, because most people don't think about that from the perspective of, like, you have a piece of data and here's, someone watched this program, or like on our platform, like, whatever, someone did this action, whatever it is, like there's the data, and then there's the metadata, and I always joke around when people say, oh, you have so much data in your platform. No, we have so much metadata. We have so much more data about our data than the data itself.
Yes, exactly.
And that's the fascinating thing that most people don't realize. It's like, oh, well, you could talk about how much data you have, but for every data point you have, you probably have dozens of other data points that are just defining that data point, right? That's the metadata. And it's fascinating how much, like, when you look at the depth of the metadata that exists for any valuable data set, it's fascinating how much more information there really is behind it.
It just isn't as sexy, right? It's not as sexy because it's not the, person level information. Of course, I'm talking about, privacy and so forth. There's no identity attached to it. It's that, it's like an encyclopedia, and which really evolved to become the internet, right? So I think that's why metadata kind of takes this back seat, but because in the public eye, it doesn't have that sexy appeal. It is, like, to your point, in order to have that sexy one, you got to have all these substantive data sets to provide that. And I think that's where the importance factor of quality and having the abundance, like you said, you can have 15, 20, hundreds of data sets that support that one data set. It's about accuracy. And that's really where we say it all the time. It's quality over quantity, but it's going to become even more pressing that we challenge that, given this is all now going to drive billions of dollars of advertising.
So that's a good transition point for us. We're talking about quality. You just said it. And for me, when I think quality and I think about advertising, I think about addressability and the importance of addressability when with respect to an ID graph, so that you can actually, reach that audience you're trying to reach. Right? It's one thing to define an audience, but if you can't reach it, it's useless. So talk to our listeners about that. Let's share some info on your thoughts.
Absolutely. I mean, this is just kind of picks up off of where we started with deterministic data, and this democratization of data has really made all this deterministic data available, challenging it. The spine of it being metadata, but ultimately, when it comes to the actionability, is we need to ensure that the identities that we're tying together to a household, and their device IDs, all of this is valid. And the identity that is being used to, deliver an advertising message against them is reachable. And that we are ensuring that that data then feeds back into the machine learning to ensure that we are building and perfecting the machine based on valid identities that have been reached. Because if we're doing our job right and ensuring we've got the right data sets, and that we've got, the interoperability, we now really need to make sure the machine is also learning based on the accuracy of the same data and identities. Because because I know we've talked at length about addressability. Really, if we need all the data, but ultimately, if the machine isn't, based on addressable identities, then all that work kind of falls apart.
Yeah, for sure. And so you mentioned the point of quality over quantity. That's something that we talk about a lot at BDEX. It's something that was the focus of an article that I wrote for AdExchanger when it comes to ID graphs, because we have found through our research that addressability dies when you look at an ID graph from the point of view of quantity. And we have found in the past that there was a big focus on quantity of IDs as opposed to the quality. And when you focus on quantity first, you're basically introducing a lot of things like ad fraud and other types of problems. Things that will break your reach statistics, in the sense that you may build an audience and say that there's 10 million people in this audience, but if only 1 million are addressable, then it kind of blows up your campaign statistics to think that you're trying to reach 10 million people, when in reality you can only reach 1 million, because 9 million of them might not be addressable. And it's a very, very common problem. I think it's become sort of, over the years, it's the mantra was quantity, 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 but I think that's changing. I think that people are starting to realize the negative effects that come from that. And I think that's a good thing. I think that, while you and I have been talking about quality for years, I think that a lot of people in the industry are starting to catch up to that concept and the importance of it.
Yeah, because the rubber's hitting the road right now, right? It's a level of maturity where we are, where now we've had the years for trial and error. Again, going back to the advertisers, because that's really at the end of the day what's going to drive how fast or how well the adoption of new procedures and techniques is adopted. Is based on how much they're going to invest of their budgets. So they were probably dabbling here or there initially, but now it's really gotten to the point where, okay, we believe this is the future. This is how to reach our audiences. We're working out the kinks on some of how to, ensure we have the right data, ensure we've built the right audience, how we're going to execute and disseminate the advertising messaging. But now it's at a much larger price point. It's the budget rather than the campaign, as I said earlier. So sorry for beating a dead horse, but I believe 2024 is really that pivotal year. Is the pivotal year where we're going to start to see that we cannot make that sacrifice anymore of quantity over quality, because we know quantity is not going to generate the outcomes that the advertiser is looking for, whatever the KPI. If it's a website visit, more new customers, increased volume for a buyer, switching from one product to the next. If it was done properly with quality association, addressable identities that are truly depicting the audience intended for the product message, then the outcomes should come in line with expectations. Otherwise, we're going to continue to go through this trial and error process that's not going to yield the results that advertisers are looking for, given the bigger investments they're willing to make going forward.
Yeah. And let's face it, sometimes it takes economic, forces, right, to sort of, create change. And I think that's what's happened. We've had sort of this economic squeeze. Everything costs more right now. And so that's forcing advertisers to look closer at their budgets. And I think, for us and where we stand and for the industry, I think that's actually a really good thing.
100% agree, because it is what drives innovation. It forces us to, always, looking to avert risk, but it helps innovate. and innovation comes from success. Like we learn, but it also we learn from, our errors and our misses. And I think we've had enough time with the, technology, the processes, all of the different methods, the device graphs, what, you even at BDEX know over the 10 years, you've learned so much by just, working with your customers and also doing, your own internal research. We're learning as we go. But I think for the takeaway is that the economics are speaking to it. And Wall Street is watching. And that's where it comes back to revisiting the basics and ensuring we've got the quality metrics reflective of truth, and addressability that's going to work.
All great points. So with all of this quality, how do we keep quality? And I'm hoping you're right. I'm hoping 2024 is the year that we're bringing quality to the forefront. And how do we do that with AI? Can you talk to us and kick us off on our last topic of AI and identity, Fariba?
Yeah, I think I kind of skipped the beat a little bit before I jumped right into it, because I find the whole machine learning thing so interesting. And of course, it's like a day doesn't go by that you don't hear it, especially in news programming, and along with data, like we were talking about earlier. Between data and AI, it's like it's incredible how much it's part of the everyday vernacular. But all of everything we've talked about in the past half hour is really, at the end of the day, the identification of an addressable device, which is going to be that personal level delivery, is what's going to continue to evolve as the machines get smarter. And the machines, their fuel is data. And so the data that they're ingesting needs to be reflective and accurate of the behavior they're then asked to model and predict going forward. So just like Wall Street, the economics of our lives is driven by predictions. And so AI is that means to driving those predictions to help us avert risk and anticipate what's to come. But again, we need to ensure that validity of what it is ingesting, so that it builds off of truth rather than misses. So I think with the identity piece, kind of what I said earlier is that it needs to build off of an addressable identity in order to get smarter and more effective going forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think this plays off of exactly what you said before about the economic squeeze forcing innovation, right? And so this year we've seen an abundance of AI in the news, in the industry, and a lot of innovation there for sure. And that's something that we're focused on is AI in identity, and to your point, garbage in, garbage out, right? So you need to train the AI on the proper data. And if you do that, you can get some really good outcomes.
Yeah. And I think that's where, you like, for example, customers that work with BDEX can, really have a very candid conversation about it. And, having that two-way, I think that's really the advice here is to make sure you're having those conversations with your partners, with your vendors, with your customers. It's part of our vernacular these days. So let's make sure that, and what we do in our processes. So I think it's really important to have that conversation to understand how the machines are learning, and the data that's being ingested with each of the partners that leverage those types of tools.
Yeah, agree. Perfect. Agree. Exactly. And I think that, we've been, that's one of the things we do is, we're very transparent about how we train our platform on some 200 billion bid stream signals. So we're getting a true understanding of what good identity data looks like versus bad identity data, and have built and trained our system to be able to decipher that and filter out the bad and identify which are the actual addressable IDs, so that we can help our customers build audiences that are based on highly addressable IDs.
So that's what you mean by a good ID, is that it's addressable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So, a bad ID would be defined as either an ID that we link to things like bots and click farms and other kinds of ad fraud, or IDs that are temporary, because of Apple's ATT or Google's do not track. As soon as you say, no, I don't want to be tracked, your device is actually creating device IDs over and over and over again. Every time every time you load your app, or every time an ad is served, it's a different device ID to try to fool it so that it can't be tracked.
Right.
But then what happens is you end up creating all of these IDs that enter the bid stream that are not actually addressable. And so you might see them at this moment, but then, you go and you say, okay, I want to target that ID again. Well, guess what? You're never going to see that ID again, because that ID was actually temporary.
Yeah, there's a lot going on under the hood. I think, it's almost like it needs like a regular blog post of some type, maybe something else to think about. I think, that's the other thing, is life was so simple when it was just one screen.
Yeah.
And, even for those of us who remember, there were only like 5-6 channels. And it's just gotten incredibly complicated, but at the same time, incredibly opportunistic. And the ideation that is still yet to come is, it's very exciting, but it's also somewhat scary and terrifying that there is so much that's under the hood, that especially if you're an advertiser and you're talking about major brand investments with a lot of dollars at stake, it's no wonder it's taking a long time for change to happen in this industry. So it's a gift and a curse, in a way, but I think at the end of the day, we're all going to benefit from it, because I'm like, give me as much content as you can possibly give me across every screen that I possibly own. I'll take it.
Right? We have more options this way.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, because there's, to your point, there's so much under the hood, and it's so technical. And unless you've had, an engineering degree and you've done this before, you're a data scientist or, a data engineer, it can become very overwhelming. And the challenge is that the engine that's under the hood, it's not like if you're a mechanic and you learn how to fix an engine, you can fix them all, right?
yeah,
If you can learn how things work today, right? And what I just explained to you about the addressability issues and how Apple's ATT works and stuff like that, you can learn that today. But guess what? It changes month over month over month, right? And it's constantly changing, and it's changing so fast. So everything that you learn today, 6 months from now, is going to be completely different. And so it's a constant learning, situation. And I think that that's another part of the challenge when you're talking about, brands and them trying to figure out, what their campaigns are going to look like, what their budgets are going to look like, where they're going to spend their money. Because like you said, it's not one screen anymore. There's, 10 different ways for them to be able to spend their money, but they all work a little differently. And without having a full understanding of exactly how they work and where that data is coming from, and is it using AI? Is the data, deterministic? Is it, being expanded? And, could it be probabilistic? There's so many things to learn and to understand and to keep track of, that that's a big part of the challenge. And it's no wonder that so many have just kind of done the same thing, for year over year, because it's a lot to learn in order to make those changes. But I think, we're getting to a point where forced change is happening. It's like, you know, there's so many constraints, economic being one of them, that, you know, companies are being forced to change and to learn and to understand what's going on.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Oh, there's so much to unpack there. But Fariba, you know, we've already asked you our closing questions because you've been on the show, I think, twice before already. So, you know, I'm just curious. We'll wrap it up anyway with this question. You know, if you could go back when you first came into, we'll say, the data industry, the advertising industry, what is the number one piece of advice you would give yourself?
Oh gosh, it's so hard because, you know, it was such a different time. I mean, sadly that we didn't even have email back then or the internet, but but I think, you know, it really is more about just really be courageous. And you know, and I think that I did have some of that in looking, not really kind of taking no, or oh, we can't solve this problem. It's just keep digging. And I think what we're learning in today's environment is there's always an answer to be uncovered. And you know, I did some of that, and it sent me down a path that's led me where I am today, and I'm really grateful for it. And also surrounding myself around with people that truly inspire. So I think those are advice that I would continue to give myself, because I did take advantage of that, and it proved incredibly beneficial, and I'm grateful for it.
That's good advice. I do have to say the one thing that this whole conversation, if I had to wrap it up and summarize, the importance of this conversation is start with the data.
Yeah.
You know, start with your audience, know your audience.
Yeah.
I think everything you both said, I mean, it really just summarizes, and that's the simple takeaway from it. You know, if you get so caught up in all the different channels that you could be on, obsessing with it, you got to start with your audience. Where is your audience? You know, so I thought this was a really great conversation. Thank you so much, Fariba, for coming on. And we are not getting into tech stack today for anyone listening, but we've already heard Fariba's favorite tools in her tech stack. But in closing, Fariba, would you like to tell the listeners how they can find you?
Yeah, thank you guys so much. It's always a pleasure. So fun. I can't believe that 45 minutes just went by. It was so fast. But you can reach me, or if you have any questions, get connected at TiVO.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to DM me there. And I look forward to hearing from you guys that are listening. And in the future, hopefully get to see you guys again soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Fariba.
Thank
Audience
you.
members, we hope that you will check out BeatX's Omni IQ. You can simply go to beatx.com, or if you're watching on video, I'm going to pull up the QR code that you can scan that will take you there. And once you're there, you can create an account, upload a CSV, and from your CSV of all your first-party data, you'll get gender, birth year, household income analytics on your data. No credit card required. There's really nothing to lose. We don't do anything with your data. It's just for you to learn. But of course, once you start learning about your data, you're going to want to continue to learn more. So of course, you can upgrade, and we would love to hear what you think about it. And we'd also love to hear what you think about the show. So please reach out to us at info@beatx.com and share your qualitative data with us so we can make this better for you. Thank you so much for coming, Fariba.
Thank you, guys. Enjoy the
Fariba. Thank you.
All right.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.